The Bob Murphy Show, episode 388.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another crossover episode of The Bob Murphy Show. This time Adam Heyman is asking me questions about theology. And it's a particularly intriguing, I would say, episode because Adam is coming at this from a very different place than where I am right now. And yet we're both acknowledging that the other person's not a complete moron. And so I think it's a fruitful discussion. So obviously we don't reach any conclusions that deeper thinkers have pondered in their day. But I think this is a unique conversation that you haven't heard quite the spin we put on these perhaps tried and true questions and answers. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Adam Heyman on deep thoughts regarding the divine.
Well, hello, Bob, and hello, everybody. Welcome to either Heyman Nature or the Bob Murphy Show, depending on how you are consuming this content. Bob and I are a little nervous because we're going to try and talk about religion and God and stuff, and that seems hard. Does it seem hard, Bob?
Yes, this is deep stuff, but yet we shouldn't shy away from it. We tackle all sorts of things, and I think it may help the folks at home.
I hope it will. Let's lean into it, face forward, forthrightly.
Mm-hmm. And also, as I think you're getting ready to explain, this is a great one for our crossover episodes because you and I are respectful of each other, but I know you don't agree with my position on this, so I think this will be good.
I think it's going to be great. And if things get too feisty, we're all the way across the country from one another, so it can't get too heated and violent. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to play the heel kind of in this episode because Bob is a believer and I am not. But just so I don't get tons of hate mail, I want to let you all know that although I'm not a believer, I have a lot of positive feelings about people who do believe in God. And I have for a long time. Like when I was a kid, it wasn't lost on me that almost all of the religious people that I knew, the kids, the families, they were the happiest people also that I knew. And they had the best values. They were just nicer, it seemed like, than other people. That's still not lost on me. I never actually thought that the arguments to prove the existence of a God, they never compelled me, but it's not like I think religion is bad for people. On the contrary, I think that the role religion plays on our species is an essential one. I think that when people say we evolved with religion and with a, quote, God-shaped sized hole in our heart, shaped and sized, I think that's true. And I think when people don't believe in something transcendent, they're apt to fill that hole with something awful, like some noxious ideology or narcissism or self-destruction or something. I think that's totally true. I also think that organized religion, even as bad a rap as it gets, I think it fulfills a useful function in society of transmitting a hierarchy of values to the lay people without them having to be, go to seminary school or whatever, without having to learn philosophy. And, I think the sitting in the pew every Sunday or whatever and learning, these basic things, I think that helps keep a society organized in a productive, forthright way. I see virtue in that. There's also obvious negative impacts to society like war and dogmatism and religious authoritarianism or something like that. But overall, I do think that it's positive, even though I don't believe. And I also really like the Jordan Peterson approach of finding the meaning in the deepest and oldest stories that our species has created. I think there are truths about our nature there that can be, you can comb through all those old stories and get insights into what it is to be a human. I think there's things embedded in there. Maybe they're metaphorical, maybe not. I think they're metaphorical. But I think these are extremely useful. I don't think you should just, toss religion away. I think it should be studied. My problem comes in that I think that all these really, really good things about religion go haywire when people believe these metaphysical claims are actually true. I mean, that's the thing I could never, swallow. The story I heard in Sunday school or whatever about the guy in the sky or whatever, all the claims to metaphysical things that I just don't believe are true. Maybe they are. I mean, I'm not saying I'm omniscient, but I just don't believe them. So with my, I hope I'm not cast as the villain, although I am definitely in contraposition to your position on this matter, Bob.
Yeah, so thanks for all that. And we have plenty of fodder. Folks, beforehand, we were wondering, like, oh, do we have enough for an episode? And I said, if we can't wing it and talk about theology when we clearly could have gone 15 minutes before we were talking about the Incredible Hulk in a previous episode, then something's wrong. So yeah, just even there, what you were saying, I jotted some notes and we can, there's plenty to discuss. So let me just say at the outset, for people who don't know, I was raised Catholic and I went to a Catholic, we called it grammar school. That's, K through 8. And then a high school they were explicitly Catholic. It was St. John the Evangelist was my grammar school, and it was St. Thomas Aquinas High School. And I went through confirmation in terms of the sacraments as to what, Catholics receive. But in high school, I started having doubts. And by the time I was in college, I referred to myself as a devout atheist. And I went to, among the other projects I had going on, I wanted to work through the Bible and write the definitive refutation of Christianity. Because I had read, okay, so did you not know that, Adam?
I knew that you were like a militant atheist. I didn't know you were trying to be an academic about it.
Oh, yeah. But I don't know that militant's the right, I mean, I get, because I said, but I wasn't a jerk about it. So sometimes like that's what the connotation people have by militant. When I say devout, I meant that's what I mean. Just like a devout religious person could sit there and like they really have thought about it and can talk to you about it and whatever. It's like likewise, it wasn't just that I was like, oh yeah, I don't believe that stuff and I moved on with it. But like I really thought it through and I went and read books of Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason, H.L. Mencken's Treatise on the Gods was a good one, and I think it's George Smith had a book. I think it was just called Atheism or something like that, or On Atheism maybe. And so I had read that, and I thought there was good stuff in them, especially Paine when he was on fire was awesome. He dedicated that book to George Washington, and I believe he wrote it in prison in France. Like just to he does the American Revolution, Thomas Paine. Then he goes to France and gets them all fired up. The revolutionaries are gonna kill the king that he helped overthrow, kind of. And he said, well, no, there's no point. The guy's out of power. He's not you don't need to kill him. So they turned on him like, oh, you soft now? And they threw him in prison. In prison, he writes part 1 of The Age of Reason, which is like a critique of Christianity, and dedicates it to George Washington. I mean, Anyway, it was interesting. And then he gets out, and then he said something like in the preface or whatever to part 2, something like, now that I've been furnished with a Bible, because he didn't have a Bible, he was doing it all from memory. Wow. And, he goes, now that I've been furnished with a Bible, I'm really going to take you priests on, or something like that. Anyway, so I read all that, but my point was I still thought the crushing death blow had not been leveled. And so I said, well, I guess it's up to me. So that's what I was planning on doing. So when I say, I wasn't a Christian in college, that's what I mean. And then I had some experience. So I don't think we should get into like my experiences here, Adam, just because I want to do more of like the surface, arguments and whatever for people. But there was some personal stuff that happened in grad school that led me to, in my mind, God grabbed me, and I was like, oh, so now given my views, and now I'm a Protestant, for just to let people know, and I am
you probably, if you heard my views, some people would say, oh, he's a Calvin. The term they would use would be Reformed. But if you know what Calvinism is, I think I'm a Calvinist. So, which is just so alien to my high school self. Like when I read about what Calvinism was, I thought, who the heck could have believed that? That's crazy. So anyway, it's a long road, but I think partly the function. So now, given that I believe in God, like, well, gee, why did he let me wallow in ignorance and, misery and stuff? And I think it was partly because now I'm very well equipped. I can talk to like a scientific materialist who believes in standard Darwinian evolution and stuff. You know what I mean? Like the Big Bang, because I used to be that guy. So I know how to talk to him. And that's precisely why, Adam, you're certainly not offending me with this stuff, because everything you just said, I probably would have agreed with when I was 25. So
interestingly, we'll probably get into this, but I suspect most dogmatic materialists are a little too certain about their views for my tastes as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an error to believe in God, like an intellectual one, but I think there's another error on the other side to just dogmatically believe that we know everything about the universe and its nature.
Mm-hmm.
There's way more that we don't know than we do. And I think a lot of scientific people make that mistake. Before we go on, I don't want to go on a huge tangent, but from materialist, how did you land on Protestantism? I mean, did you roll the dice and just pick one? Or?
I just got the Ouija board out and I just said, God, my Lord. Okay. So at first I'm trying to remember. So I came to believe there was a God. And again, I've told this story elsewhere, but I don't want this to be so much about my personal conversion.
Yeah, sure.
So I came to believe there was a God, but I didn't know like what kind of God he was. And so then I really got into reading stuff and I, examined Buddhism and things like that. And Christianity seemed the most compelling. And presumably that's, I was raised Christian. So I understand my worldview was shaped by my culture and the stuff I read and my parents and whatever. So it's not surprising that, of all the moral authorities, the teachings of Jesus really resonate with me. Okay, but they did. Maybe we can speculate as to why it was that, but they did. And then, and because this is probably way too simplistic for people, but like Buddhism seemed to me that it was saying like, oh, if you can just convince yourself that you don't know the difference between a good thing and suffering, then nothing can hurt you or something. You know what I mean? And I was like, well, yeah, but no, if something's awful, something's awful. And then, Christianity was more like, yes, awful things will happen in this world, but don't worry. There's a reason God let those happen and it'll make sense to you. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like you having to convince yourself, yeah, someone, kills your kid. For all you know, maybe that's a good thing. Like that just seemed to be what, the wise Buddhist stories or parables were teaching, or, who can say what is good or bad. And, but anyway, so there's that element. And then, I tried going, this is going to maybe bother some Catholics, but the first time I went back to Mass, I went to a Catholic church that was down the street. I was living in New Jersey at the time. And, I get in there and they're going through the thing, and then it comes time for what they call the homily. It's like the sermon. Mm-hmm. And the priest hands it off to some guy who gets up there. He looked like he was from the Music Man, talking about how they're raising money for they're going to go build some new building for the church. And he was just this real huckster guy. And I was just like, and I just got up and walked out. And I wonder, like, if any of the people, like, if that gave them so anyway, I was like, no, this is not for me. And I realized Catholics will say, well, that's not a very good refutation of Catholic doctrine. I know. I'm just saying, where I was in my life, I was like, no, I'm not sitting here and listening to this. This is crazy. And I don't know. I was reading the Bible. I can't remember the exact progression, but I found a church and they were really filled with the Spirit. And I was just like, it got to the point where I had to drive an hour to get to this place from where I was. We had to set chairs up because they were poor. Like they had to some other like gym or something was letting them use their facility on Sundays for Mass. And so, or for services, I don't know if they called it Mass. And so like we had to go early to set up the folding chairs and everything for us to do our deal. And then we had to break it all. So it was like all told like a 4-hour deal for me to go to church on Sunday. And like, as of Wednesday, I couldn't wait to go back. Like that's, you know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh, I got to go to church today because otherwise God will be mad at me. It was Like anyway. So I'm just saying that was, it was a Protestant, in the way they just would read the Bible. So my answer, Adam, now is reading the Bible and reading commentaries and stuff. I think the Protestants are way more compelling than the Catholics, though I have not studied like Catholic theologians as much as I'm comparing what I grew up with in terms of the church that my parents took me to and whatever to, really learned Protestants. So maybe that's not a fair comparison.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question and ask you to put a percentage on it, even though that doesn't make any sense. But like from your perspective, what percentage of the value is gained just by believing in a Christian God, even if you happen to have the wrong denomination or something from your perspective, like 98% to 2%,
Yeah, I get what
something
you're
like
saying.
that?
I was even wondering the way you started out and you're contrasting it and like saying, I'm a believer and you're not. That's an interesting, it's sort of like, oh, that guy's a truther, like with the 9/11. So I know you weren't using it pejoratively, but you get what I'm saying. Isn't that interesting? Because
I wouldn't have chosen it if people who believed didn't use it as a good thing. It's like,
oh, okay, you're right. We do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're the ones that did that.
Yes.
Okay. Like I said, I wasn't even ironically saying it like, why are you calling us that? I was just pointing out, isn't that interesting? Because you believe all sorts of things.
sure. No,
And I
but
believe
wouldn't
a lot
have
of
used
things.
it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have
And I
used it
believe
if
things
thought it was-
besides, but it is, okay, you're right. We're the one, yeah. Believers are the ones who use that term. So, yes. Well, I guess 9/11 truthers, like 9/11, they came up with 9/11 truth, and then their critics just started using it to make fun of them. So, I guess there's that too. You got
It
what
was
I'm
a
saying?
pejorative first, I'm pretty sure.
I don't think so. I think no, it didn't. They called themselves 9/11 truth. Like that'd be a weird thing for people, their critics, just to on their own make up. Oh, those are truthers. Like if they weren't calling themselves truthers, that wouldn't make sense. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that. I disagree. I think the 9/11 truth people called themselves that first, and then their critics started making fun of them using that term. But we can move on. So yeah. So where the reason I brought that up is that, remember Firefly?
Of course.
Was it in the movie? There's one where the priest guy or whatever he is, just says to him,
called
"Yeah, preacher." That's it. Just believe or something as he's dying. You remember that scene? I don't know. Is that from the movie? I can't remember what that's, or is it from like the last episode of the series? But in any event, and at the time, watching it, I didn't know if I agreed with that or not. I thought that was too simplistic. But so certainly, as a Christian, the important thing to us is, does somebody believe, Jesus died for their sins and came back, from resurrection on Easter Sunday? Like, do you literally believe that happened? Not just, is a Sermon on the Mount, some good things to follow and whatever,
Right.
and wouldn't society, but no, do you literally believe that? Do you believe that you are bound for hell based on your own behavior and Jesus saved you? Like, that's kind of, the thing that's way more important than, how do you feel about infant baptism or something?
Right.
So there's that. But even like, to me, just if somebody believes in a personal God, like that's kind of a big deal too. So it's, in terms of the percentages or whatever you want to say, it's humongous if somebody believes in, says that I believe Jesus is my savior and died for my sins. I once did one of those Vince McMahon, the meme where he keeps getting more and more shocked.
Yeah.
So I did it. I think I'm trying to remember what the four were. I think one was, if someone says I'm a Christian, then they said, I think it's no. The first one was, I believe in God. The second one was, I'm a Christian. The third one was, Jesus is my savior. Or no, I love Jesus. And then the fourth one was, I love the Lord. And then that was like, he's falling out of the chair. Seeing the progression if people talk like that, because it's different levels. Because to say I love Jesus is like, okay, so this guy's really Christian. And then, but to say that to call him the Lord is next level. Because it's not just like, oh, he's this nice guy that's looking out for me. It's no, he's this guy that I need to obey. Like, so it's just, anyway.
I have a blasphemous aside that I have to speak, or it'll just be in my mind forever.
Go ahead.
Do you watch South Park?
I used to.
Well, way back in the day, Cartman and the boys started a faith band, a Christian rock band.
Uh-huh.
I think it was called Faith Plus One, and the lyrics were like sexual,
Uh-huh.
about loving Jesus. And so Cartman's up there singing, and it's very graphically, it's a love song, a romantic love song. And
Yeah.
people are going, wow, that little boy sure does love Jesus.
Oh, I didn't see that one. I did see the one where he was a faith healer.
Yeah.
He was healing the women of the uglies or something like that. That was pretty funny. I remember that. So as far as like in terms of doctrine, or like I said, the doctrinal point would be, but as far as like if I meet somebody and I'm trying to get a sense of where's this guy coming from or whatever, it would be a big thing if somebody were willing to say, I love the Lord. That's just because I like the love element too. Because I think that's important. I think unfortunately there's a lot of Christians who are just real big on, certain doctrinal elements, but they actually aren't, they're not exuding love for humanity, and that's kind of important.
Yeah,
and I think that's partly what gives Christians a bad rap.
So you had a personal experience that was very deep, and it brought you from just a materialist viewpoint towards believing in a God. But what would you say to someone who was like you, but didn't have any experience like that? So what would you say to them to convince them that they're wrong? You haven't met this divine gentleman, but I have. What can I tell you that makes your reason want to believe this religious story?
Okay, yeah, and that's partly what I'm doing with a lot of I'm an economist and stuff too, but that is partly what I'm trying to do is to come up with things. And I will confess, I don't know that anything would have flipped me. I think there was, with my personal story, there was like a 1-2 punch where I had this epiphany about secular things, like stuff was going on with me socially and whatever, and I was like in these patterns that were reinforcing because I just had this view about how the world was, and I was just wrong. And then I just had this epiphany where I realized, and I was just like, and I'll tell a little bit because otherwise, and when I realized that all this stress and anxiety, I could feel it just flowing out of me. And my friend, when I told him about the experience, said, "Oh, your demons left you." And so I still wasn't a believer. And that was just like, and even he wasn't either. He was just kind of using it. But I think that's real. You know what I mean? Like if that phrase, Jordan Peterson would come in and explain, well, that's just two sides of the same, coin or whatever. But you get my point.
Totally.
And like I had like my skin was flaking off and stuff. And then I just knew, and I had been seeing dermatologists and it wasn't working, wasn't helping. And when that experience happened, like I had this immense craving to go get orange juice. And I just knew, my skin's going to be fine now. Like, you know what I mean? But I didn't realize how much stress and anxiety I was carrying around over the years. And I just didn't become expert at shouldering it. Yeah. And so then when it was released instantly, I was like, and so anyway, so that, and then I was like, since I now know that that's possible, whereas until it happened to me, I didn't, I knew about the mind-body connection, but I thought that was kind of hocus-pocus stuff. Yeah. So once I realized like, this is real, then I thought, okay, I actually now believe there was a guy, Jesus, who went around healing lepers, not because he was the Son of God, but if they believed it, you know what I mean? Because like in other words, leprosy was what I had times 10.
Sure.
And so if he could just say you're healed, I forgive you your sins or whatever, just so I started going down that path. So anyway, it was that thing. And so if someone hasn't had that and just been completely wrong about something and then seen that, because in other words, so that warmed me up to what it looks like if there was an important part of your worldview that was just totally wrong, and then all the evidence was just bouncing off you because you couldn't even see evidence against it. So that's what I'm saying for the materialism now. All sorts of different arenas are screaming out that our reality is way more complex than just a bunch of atoms bouncing around, and that's not a good explanation. There's of the reality, or that's just one layer of it. And yet, I just remember, back when I thought that way. And so, like the work of Stephen Meyer, who I'm going to try to get on the Bob Murphy show. I'm talking to his booker right now. He's agreeing to it in principle. We just got to work out the dates. Is the primary stuff I would focus on. So if someone who's like an intellectual scientific materialist, I would say just Google Stephen Meyer. It's Meyer. It's called The God Hypothesis, or The Return of the God Hypothesis, maybe is his book. And he just goes through like developments in biology, but also like the fine tuning argument, like just stuff in terms of, but it's more like the Big Bang and things like that, where each is the more that it progresses, they just realize that the chance of just all the constants of the universe all being fine tuned and everything to support life, it's vanishingly small, stuff like that. And then there was another one too, and I can't remember now what it was.
I think he talks a little bit about the information problem.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's distinct from. I think you're right. I think it's something like an information or computer science that also.
I haven't read his book, but I've heard him interviewed several times.
Same here. I haven't read his book, but yeah, I've seen him give several lectures, and he's a sharp.
He's
guy.
very sharp. I think he's got the most solid footing underneath him when he is poking holes in the certain scientific claims, the certainty involved in certain scientific claims. I reject. I mean, I guess I don't know if he does this conclusively, but he probably does. But I reject if he's doing the, since I've poked a hole in, the Indiana Jones swaparoo. Since I've poked a hole in your hypothesis, I'm going to put God in here in its place and hocus pocus. I think there's lots of things we don't understand about the simplistic thing of just atoms bouncing around, and that's supposed to explain everything we know about. Yeah, how it doesn't even explain how our consciousness works, as far as I'm concerned. Much less, the confusion about quantum mechanics and. Actually,
that right there, what you just said, and this is kind of like a little thing, like an aside, but right, the more I thought about it, there was a guy that I heard being interviewed by an intelligent design podcast, and so this is 95% this guy's argument, but I think I made it a little bit slicker, more sleeker. Because slick sounds like it's like a lawyer coming in and trying to trick you with something. So no, I think it's valid, but I think I packaged it better the way he did it. But anyway, I even might have told it to you, Adam. I can't remember, but it goes like this: so let's say you're a scientific materialist, and so you think ultimately it's just atoms about like at the molecular and certainly at the atomic level, it's just all the laws of physics, right? It's not that the atoms that are in somebody's nervous system are different from atoms in a rock. It's just, they're arranged differently, but the laws are all still the behavior. So in a low enough level of detail, or granular, you wouldn't see consciousness or free will or anything, right? And so given that if there were, what we see of as a body, like I'm attributing to you that you have an internal monologue and stuff like that, and you're thinking things. But technically, I don't know that you are. And if I looked, we cut you open and looked at things, we wouldn't see like, oh, and this is where the thinking occurs, or this is where his conscious experiences are occurring. You get what I'm saying? We're just assuming that because, we have them ourselves, and we just think, well, since I feel stuff on the inside, I'm, probably other people do too, because there's nothing special. But so where it's going is if we could explain there's the Big Bang and this, and it all goes through, there's nothing that the consciousness would add to the behavior of that body. And so if these creatures would all go mate and they would have reproductive fitness and blah, 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 that could explain everything. Adding in consciousness doesn't make it more fit, evolutionarily speaking. It can't, because the atoms are going to do what the atoms are going to do, right? It's not that, this arrangement of atoms with some internal consciousness and subjective experience will have more copies of its DNA in terms of future generation. How could it? It's, if everything is just the arrangement of atoms and it's just blind laws of physics, if you get what I'm saying.
Totally.
So because of that, then I was like, well, then why the heck do we have consciousness? So I think that just kind of shows there's something really wrong with the materialist approach.
Well, yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is you'd have a lot more credence in saying it's just atoms and the laws of physics if we knew what the laws of physics were. But since we don't, there's just an enormous hole in the story. And we don't understand, like I said, our own consciousness and what quantum mechanics means. As you were saying earlier, that mind controlling the body phenomenon you had back in college about, your leprosy curing or whatever. Um, as you were saying that, I just wanted to express that I really love religious descriptions of behavior like that, of events like that. I think saying that was demons leaving your body, I think that's a great way to think about what happened there. Even if it's not something that Dante would, agree with metaphysically, but I do think that we have these things inside us, these little personalities, as Jordan Peterson likes to talk about, and these horrible subroutines that are keeping you in such an anxious, neurotic mess that you are harming your own skin with your thoughts and the creation of, cortisone or cortisol, whatever the negative stress hormone is. And yeah, I think thinking about things in a religious framework, I think that's great. I do it all the time, even though I don't literally believe what I'm talking about. I think the metaphor is so appropriate and it's also literarily pleasing to speak that way. But I do it all the time. I don't have a problem with that at all.
And so, just to circle back to your question. So I think if I could grab my 25-year-old self and just, we would keep meeting and we'd talk about things, I think I could open his mind up to showing all of the limitations of the strictly, physical materialist worldview. Like I said, one of them was that, but things like, complexity theory in terms of the standard Darwinian account, there's too much information that's packed into even just cells that it's like, no, the standard story of, just random mutation and then, natural selection. It just, I think it doesn't work.
I agree. I like that argument. I absolutely like that argument. But the difference between you and me, or me and someone who's just reflexively religious, is I leave this enormous chasm open for things we don't know yet.
Right. So I would put it this way. Like, I would think I could get the 25-year-old after a while to realize we might be living in a simulation.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like that could explain it. So
sure.
But my point is my worldview up to that moment was just barren. I was like, no, that cannot possibly explain the stuff we can observe right now. Whereas, if we were just in a simulation, that would make sense. And there's a sense in which kind of like, the demon's leaving my body. You could say that's metaphorical. Like that's an accurate way given them. Likewise, if someone says, hey, do you think we're living in a simulation? I could say, in a sense, if it's God's imagination, you know what I mean? Sure. Like, that's kind of what it would mean. And people say, but no, you think we're real. And I would say, well, to us, this is real, but we're not as real as God is. You get what I'm saying? So
totally. To
me, I'm okay if somebody wants to say, are we living in a simulation? It's just, instead of it being like, oh no, it's those damn machines in the Matrix, it's no, I'm a benevolent being that is teaching us great things with this adventure, and then we're going to be with him, and he's going to, show us the whole story once the simulation plays out.
Before we move on, I love the simulation hypothesis. I speak that way also. My objection to people who think it's true or think it's trillions to one more likely that we live in one or not is that they're just making up those numbers. That's not how odds work.
We went over that.
Right. Yeah. But I do love I love it as a framework, a way of thinking about things. And for all I know, it's true. And the other thing I just have to say is that a buddy of mine is very mathematically inclined. He says he believes in the simulation too, but it's not the one Nick Bostrom is thinking about or Elon Musk is thinking about. He's referring to the fact that our brains and our sensory organs aren't equipped to really teach us or reveal to us what base reality looks like or is like. So what we're actually living in is a simulation provided to us by our sense organs traveling through, optic nerve, through the neurons, giving electrochemical transmissions to our brain, who is living in a simulation. It's not actually seeing the real world. It's seeing some, like we only see, less than 1% of the spectrum of radioactive, electromagnetic spectrum. So that's a limitation of our simulation. And And there's a sense in which everything is kind of like that.
Mm-hmm. There's also too, so yeah, I mean, that's, scientifically demonstrable, that sort of thing. But I've noticed over the years too, where, if my recollection as to what somebody said, or sometimes even what someone emailed, I'll be absolutely certain that they said something, and the times when I realized I was wrong, it's where it was not good news. It was like, oh, they don't like what we're up to. And then the other person, like, that I was, discussing with, like, so what are we going to do? And they're like, no, that's not what they said. They said this. And I thought they were sugarcoating it. Like, no, dude. And then and I had the means of going and checking, like if it's an email or something. I was like, oh, they're right. They didn't say what and like I said, I would have bet $1,000 that my recollection was accurate. And it's like, freaks me out. So again, she's kind of showing like believing is seeing instead of the opposite. That if you go in and you're thinking like, oh, these guys are mad at us, or oh man, this, and then you like click on the email and oh no, this is what I thought. And no, that's actually not what he said. So, and then that's even more liable to misinterpretation if it's someone just talking to you. And where I'm coming, there was a thing where, my roommate and I in college, we had a silk screen T-shirt business, and we had the first big order for, we did some practice orders or whatever, for friends. But then this fraternity, they had I forget what you call it. They were going to like a ski trip. And so they had us print up like 60 shirts or something for them about, commemorating the event that they gave out to all their brothers. And then they were having a snowball fight, and the ink just started running on some of the shirts because we hadn't cured it long enough, like with the heat lamp or whatever. It was our first big order, and we just didn't let it dry long enough. And so they came to us, and the guy was upset, and he's this humongous dude. This this frat guy, and then my roommate was doing most of the talking, and then it ended, and I thought he said, "We can't do business again." And so we left, and I was like, oh, they're so mad. And then in the car, my roommate was like, yeah, well, that's good. At least we can do business again. And I was like, wait. And we did do business again, right? So he said we can do business again, and I heard him say we can't do business again. Anyway,
there's something
proving the existence of God, but I'm just saying, I'm realizing, how much you've seen.
Tangent. This is a tangent, but I literally did an entire episode of my other podcast called Natural Order, where I was describing several examples of situations where literally what you are thinking, the framework in which you are thinking, alters your perceptions, both visually and auditorily. And this can translate up to, what you think you saw some politician say on the TV, because you're viewing everything through a certain moral framework, ideological framework, and it literally does impact your perceptions. So in your case, you're thinking negative, and so you literally misheard what the guy said, we're like that in a lot of different circumstances.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's why, Trump can say something perfectly innocuous and be like, oh my gosh, Trump thinks the moon is the same thing as Mars. Like, what are you talking? No, he doesn't. And other people do it too. Like, there were a lot of clips from Biden before it was really bad where people, what's he even talking about? And I would listen to it and be like, yeah, he sounds like, my old uncle or something. I know exactly what he's saying. But then, at some point, even I was like, okay, yeah, something's wrong with that guy. But
so I want to flesh out your position, which is a firm belief in a certain set of strictures and metaphysical things, from mine, because I just said I believe, you should have a whole bunch of uncertainty about your beliefs, which some people would think that means I'm an agnostic. And I think that's not true. The definition of atheist, I just looked up, is a person who disbelieves in the existence of God or gods. And this tracks with how theists have always used the term. They'll say, Adam, do you believe in God? And I'll say no. And so they'll say, oh, so you're an atheist. But I want to make clear that doesn't mean that I know for sure that there is no God. I don't have access to that kind of knowledge. All I'm saying is that the arguments and evidence I've been presented with do not compel me to believe that assertion, so I don't believe it. I don't think agnostic fits in this context. It's not like I'm ambivalent about it. It's not like half the evidence support one side and half the evidence supports the other side. It's not like that. So what I want to get from you is
Can I just real quickly
yeah,
high five you on there? Right. I also did not like, I called myself a devout atheist. And some people did, like some of my Christian friends in undergrad, this one guy, I remember, he's like, Bob, you're an agnostic. And he was trying to help me.
right.
He was upset because you know what I mean? Like in his mind, I wasn't going to burn in hell as hot or something. I don't know what, right. Because in his mind, he thought, Bob, surely, you're a smart guy. So clearly you don't think that you can prove there isn't a God. You know what I mean? And so my point was, I don't believe in the Christian God the same way I don't believe in Zeus. So do you guys all walk around saying, well, I'm not, I can't prove there isn't a Zeus. I'm just saying I reserve judgment. Like, no, you don't believe in Zeus. Right. I'm saying I don't believe in Yahweh. So I get the distinction you're making. And although I think it is helpful to have these distinctions between an atheist and an agnostic, I think sometimes, people are obnoxious about trying to make agnostic cover everything, and like as if you couldn't be an atheist unless you literally think you can have a mathematical proof that God doesn't exist, which of course nobody would have.
Exactly. So let's assume that we've poked enough holes in the materialist claim to a perfect understanding of the universe such that it's all the laws of physics and atoms bouncing around like billiard balls. And the information problem, the complexity problem, let's say we poked enough holes such that we don't think we have all the answers there, but yet I'm still not at a place where I believe in, the stories you hear in church either. Mm-hmm. So how do we talk about that gap between where I'm at and where you're at? Why am I wrong and why are you right?
All right, well, let's start with this, and I don't know if this is where you wanted this to go, but if one way of putting it is, okay, let's say I got my 25-year-old self opened up to the idea that, we could be living in a simulation. I kind of see the problem with just hardcore, I would say crude or naive physical material, or I could just say materialism. That is physical materialism. And so like, sure. But yeah, Bob, still there's a long way from, there could be this reality that we're experiencing could have been designed by an intelligent being or group of beings. And, I better not eat meat on Fridays because Jesus is going to be mad at me. Right. So I guess the next thing I go try to tackle would be, I think you can make a case that Jesus came back from the dead and that explains the explosion in the early church. And so I agree that's a big ask. Like that would be a hard case to make. But but it's not just like, oh, but look, it says right here in John 3:16. You know what I mean? Like there's ways you can go about that. And I think people who just think, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. You might be surprised. And my trump card on this, remember I said in the beginning of this episode, one of the things I read in my budding atheist phase was H.L. Mencken's treatise on the gods. And so what he said, for example, so he was not, he was a cynic, but he said he thought like religion, like where it came from is, he hypothesized that, maybe the floodwaters are rising and it keeps crushing the villagers and whatever. And there's all these people trying to do stuff. And then one time, just coincidentally, some medicine man, waves his arms and says some stuff and the waters really did recede. So the guy just got lucky, but then that could have been the birth of, so he's got powers. Okay. So there's that. And then when it came to him talking about Christianity, he said, number one, there have been plenty of attempts of people writing books to, and he had in quotation marks, blow up Christianity, and I think they largely fall flat. So I was surprised he said that, and that's why I said, well, I'm going to do it then. And then he also, I need to go reread it because I've been saying this a lot over the years when we do these, these types of interviews. And so I should probably go check and make sure I have my facts right. But at the time, what I took him to be saying was kind of similar to the medicine man, that he thought there was a historical guy, Jesus of Nazareth, going around telling people he was the Messiah, in terms of their Jewish faith or whatever, what they were expecting. And that he said, I'm going to be killed and come back. The Romans did crucify him. And holy cow, it was a freak thing. The guy actually 3 days later was walking around. And so that, of course, would make his disciples totally believe in him, be willing to die for him, blah, blah, blah. And then hence you get the Christian church. So Mencken wasn't saying he was the son of God. He was just, like, kind of like with the medicine man. So that, anyway, I'm just saying Mencken thought that the best explanation, and let me just say one quick thing, and then obviously take this wherever you want to go, Adam. Because one thing is to say, what are you talking about? Like, don't you believe that, you think the Mormons, that took off. You think Islam took off, so I guess we should believe in Muhammad. But the difference is, and a lot of people gave their lives for communism, so the fact that people are willing to die for something doesn't mean it's true. But I think the difference between the early Christian church and this stuff is the original, like, apostles and stuff going around saying, Jesus crucified, we saw him. They would have to know they were lying. And it's weird to me that they would have, ruined their lives, and all but one of them was murdered by the authorities for them preaching Jesus. It's weird to me that they would lie, or that they would give their lives up for a guy that they knew was wrong. And you get what I'm saying? So anyway, that's just one difference, in case people think I'm just merely saying if people are willing to die for a cause, it must be true. Of course, that's not my claim.
I'm going to disagree with you, but first I'm going to throw you a pretty big bone.
Okay.
Because I think I've heard an episode of your Bob Murphy show you're talking specifically about this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a stronger case that is made than you just did in the last handful of minutes here. The evidence for Jesus's resurrection, I don't believe it, but there is a lot, and it all flows together in an interesting and compelling way. If you're predisposed to believe such a thing, I disbelieve it for various reasons that are maybe particular to my psychology, but I do think we should link to that episode of yours and let people hear the full story. Because
are you talking about when I had Christian Hubbs on and he kind of walked through the case for it, or was it just me talking?
Memory's tricky. I thought it was just you, but I could be wrong.
Okay, just because we did have a specific episode of that, and Christian went to, I think he's got a master's degree in apologetics or something, and he, in case people are like, isn't that the guy? I work for him. After that episode, when I was just getting his bio to read for the Bob Murphy Show episode, today I'm talking to Chris, and he has a PhD in machine learning from Carnegie Mellon, and at Infinio, we were launching an AI wing. I was like, holy cow. And so we were, anyway. But yeah, he gave a guest sermon somewhere on like the evidence for the historical, or was it the historical case for the resurrection? That's the thing. So I'll give you that link, but I think that's probably, in any event, that episode would be way more informative than anything I would have done off the cuff, because Christian really, had prepared a whole sermon on it.
Yeah. I probably listened to two different things and I'm conflating them. One was you having that interview and the other was you talking about it probably in relation to something else. So yeah, I think people who are interested in maybe an argument that would persuade them, check that out. I was not persuaded, but I think that's just an epistemological barrier. I set a barrier on big claims really, really high.
Yeah, but you said the important thing is that you agreed it was a stronger case than you were expecting, and that's what I would. Yeah, that's what I would say to my 25-year-old self.
Much stronger.
And I would like to think my 25-year-old self would have been intellectually because at first it'd be like, this is like Paul Bunyan stuff or whatever.
I mean, like part of the reason, exactly. Like part of the reason I disbelieve it is because I do believe that a lot of people can behave in weird ways all at once, even though it goes against their interests. Like that's a psychological thing people do. But I can certainly see why another person would hear that story and go, yes, and I believe that this rises above that hurdle in such that no human would act that way in the days of the early church. I get both sides of the argument. I'm just telling you which side I come off on. Either A, the historical record is, spotty or something, or B, there are psychological reasons that aren't supernatural. Which doesn't mean I'm right, by the way. It just means I don't believe the claim, and the evidence for me just didn't reach the right threshold such that I believed. But I never had an encounter with the Almighty, so that sort of thing will help you lower your threshold, right? If you're looking for a reason to believe a thing, it's a lot easier to find, and nothing like that ever happened to me. So,
So yeah, just in the spirit of our group hug here, right? I certainly would not have convinced my 25-year-old self. And even when I heard, if you might remember on my podcast a while ago, Adam, I moderated or commented on, moderate's not the right word, the debate between William Lane Craig and Christopher Hitchens. And it was like a two-parter, like on I went through their opening statements, I think is what I did.
Right.
And so I went through, I think William Lane Craig first, and then Hitchens second, I believe. That's actually how I got to know Christian, because he thought I was too harsh on William Lane Craig, and said, I met that guy, and he understood what I said, but his point was he's made that argument elsewhere, and if you heard his extended commentary, you would get. But my point was, it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about, is when he first said this. So folks, William Lane Craig is debating Christopher Hitchens on God, and one of the things he offered in his case in his opening remarks was, and point number 3, I would say, the resurrection of Jesus. And I was like, what? You're talking to people who are on the fence about whether God exists, and you're just citing, well, Jesus rose from the dead, so there's that. Which to me that was such a huge leap. Instead of here's what biologists say about how much time would be needed for the first cells to form or something.
Talk about making them think past the sale.
Yes, precisely. You get the point. But what Christian was telling me, and then the more I looked into it, was now I know why William Lane Craig said it, even though I still think the way he did it in that debate was kind of goofy. Like, there's no way anybody who didn't already believe, like even Jewish people would be like, what are you talking about? So it wasn't just atheists would have been turned off by it. So anyway, but yes, the more I looked into it, the more I realized, and then it kind of made me think back to Mencken. I was like, well, good for him that now I understand. When I first read that with Mencken, I thought, what are you talking about, dude? But okay.
So we're getting close to the end of how long we figured we'd talk. I wanted to bring up Jordan Peterson and see what you think about him, because I very much like his approach to religious matters. It seems to me like he's trying to meld the positive virtues of religion with something like a secular, spiritual something. Like his thrust is that a properly oriented hierarchy of values is something extremely useful to an individual and to a society, and that is true regardless of any external metaphysical claims. There's something about being oriented towards the good across, as he would say, every level of analysis, from the very basic to the super noble. You want all of those values aligned so that they don't contradict in an Ayn Randian way, say, and oriented towards something that is clearly the good. I mean, that's the purpose of my show, Human Nature, to try and find the proper way of being for our species, given the universe we find ourselves in. And it's a never-ending search, discovery process. But, I think there are things that are objectively good for us and things that are objectively bad, and we'd be silly not to think about things that way. So from your very religious perspective, do you think that he's watering down religion in sort of a bad way, or do you think he's trying to form a useful bridge, or what do you think about that guy?
Okay, so, and I'll be a bit spicy and psychoanalyze them too, just to give some content to this episode in case people think we're just chit-chatting. So I think what he has done is great and is a force for good on the theological stuff. I mean, we can talk about his other stuff too, but I'm talking right now about what he's doing in terms of his, going through the Old Testament. And I think now I have not heard the new stuff about where he's going through the Gospels. Even I think you have to be like a Daily Wire subscriber or something to get that, but which I'm not. So I'm talking about the old, the things he did several years ago, going through the Old Testament or some of the books. In and of itself, though, and the reason I like it is, or think it's good, I think it gave educated atheists permission to entertain the possibility that the Bible was true. And I even know, I won't say who it is because it's personal, but I know a younger guy that was an atheist, was really into Jordan Peterson for political reasons, and then gave his Bible series lectures a chance and was totally captivated and then ended up becoming Christian. And so
Not
I think
to-
that, yeah.
Not to
Go ahead.
interrupt you, but like for me, it didn't make me believe, but it
Right.
at least made me think that these stories were useful.
Yeah.
And that's pretty big, for
Right.
a guy who doesn't believe these stories. But
Yeah.
I've always loved myths. And I think
Right.
myths are the same way. There's truths in there. So yeah. Sorry.
So on that ground, though, I mean, you're right. When he's firing, I mean, Jordan Peterson is just captivating. He might be
yes.
one of the most interesting speakers I think I've ever encountered.
Yes.
Like he really sucks you in if you're into what he's talking about. Like even just if you've seen those videos of him just giving classroom lectures.
Yeah,
Can you imagine
I
if
have.
that was just your
No.
9 a.m.
No.
psychology class? Like, oh damn, I got Peterson this semester.
Well, Jennifer and I
he's
are
going
sitting
through-
on the couch listening
Yeah.
to his lecture he's giving in Toronto.
Yeah.
And yeah, what are those kids? What are they thinking?
Right. So I mean, at least they knew to record it. I'm not saying the kid did, but he knew like, oh, this stuff is fire. This is good.
Yeah.
But anyway, where I was going with all that is to say, on the other hand, though, like as much as I got excited, I was like, how could anyone not see the wisdom of the Cain and Abel story? Likewise, he can go through the movie Pinocchio and show you how brilliant that was. And I don't think there actually was Geppetto and a wooden boy puppet that became a boy.
Well,
Even
no, but his argument is that these stories, much like the biblical ones, are archetypal, and that's why there's truth in there.
Oh, right. No, I know that. And I'm not saying Jordan Peterson was, but my point was as a Christian who believes like Moses really did lead the Israelites out of Egypt.
Yep,
like there
sorry,
really
I
were
see.
the plagues and like, oh, so Jordan Peterson's good to warm people up to the truth in these stories that I had to be honest with myself. I was like, okay, but he's that awesome when he's explaining Pinocchio too.
I got you.
So there's that element. There could be a danger of if he's making it merely socially useful or something, or like, isn't it a good thing the rabble believes this stuff? I mean, we don't because, we're the elites, but, I want the average person believing this because otherwise he might try to, rape my daughter or something or rob a bank because, I want him believing the sky god's going to punish him with fire if he's a bad man.
Bob, you need to get the essential truths in this Archie and Veronica comic book number 17. I mean, this is fire. This is truth here.
But let me give you the spicy stuff that with Pete Jordan, I think he's afraid of God and he's like in an unhealthy way because he knows how inadequate Jordan Peterson, his life has been. I'm not saying because he's particularly bad. I'm just saying we all are. Like he seriously takes the premise of what if there's this omniscient being that created everything and can see everything? Like that's terrifying. And from a certain angle, and it's hard to say, but what if he really loves us? Like you need that element, otherwise it's absolutely terrifying. I understand why Christopher Hitchens, is saying, yeah, I'm glad the God of the Bible doesn't exist because he's a monster. Like if you didn't think he loved us, then it's horrifying. So again, all this stuff just keeps pointing me back to why Christianity is true. Because in Christianity, what is it? God becomes a human and then is tortured and dies for us, which, in and of itself, that doesn't really make sense. But if you see, going back to, given that there's this omnipotent being that can see everything, it's absolutely terrifying. So what could he do except to show, no, I'm on your side, than to do, you know what I'm saying? Like, because again, you could say, I used to say this when I was a devout atheist. Okay, so God created humans. He said, don't eat that tree. Adam and Eve did. He kicked them out. He said, I'm mad at you now. And then he sent his son and we murdered his son. He said, okay, now I forgive you. That doesn't make any sense, right? And it doesn't, the way I just described it. But you can see now how I'm backfilling it with, okay, but if there is this omnipotent being that's terrifying, what could he do to make us not afraid of him? Anyway.
Speaking of cool ideas I don't believe, have you and I ever talked about Scott Adams's little what does he call it? He's got a little story about what God is, and it's something about God got himself bored because he's omnipotent and all-knowing. So in order to have purpose in his life, he blew himself into zillions of bits. That was the Big Bang. And what we are and the whole rest of the universe is God reassembling himself.
I think I have either read it in his original or read someone summarizing it. But yeah, that does sound familiar now that you're saying it.
Yeah, it's a totally cool idea. I don't have any reason to believe, but I was wondering, just I know you don't believe it, but what do you think about that idea, given what the human project is, or what your conception of what the human project is? Like, we are trying to advance towards something, right? Even if it's, just a materialistic thing, we're trying to make our lives better.
There is something, and I've noticed too, as you may remember or know, Adam, I'm a huge fan of Transformers, the original cartoon, and then the movie. And when I say the movie, I mean the animated one, not the Shia LaBeouf abominations. And the slogan they had in the movie, I don't know that they ever said it in the TV show, but in the animated cartoon movie, they said, I guess animated means it's cartoon. The slogan they used was "Till all are one," and I, when you're a kid, like and then but as I was like, I don't know how I feel about that, but that seems to be a motif in a lot of things too. That like, oh, we'll all become one with the universe, and that will be our ultimate, level up or something, and our final form. And I don't, so that's not what Christianity teaches, by the way. That when you're like with God, but God doesn't absorb you. When you're in heaven, you actually still have your body. It's like a resurrected body, so it's a little bit weird. I don't know if you were in a car accident, if it means you don't have an arm. I don't know exactly how that works, but you're not just like a disembodied spirit. You're certainly not floating around playing a harp. But there is this idea that Jesus in the afterlife, like, will still have his wounds from the cross on him. So anyway, I'm just getting to like that. Yeah, there's a sense that God is everywhere, but yet, what does that mean though? That the tree is distinct from God. So what does it mean to say God is everywhere? I was just listening to an R.C. Sproul thing on this. So anyway, it's like kind of like different layers or dimensions of analysis. But in any event, yeah, it's a neat idea. But I think, again, to me, Christianity strikes that right balance between you want to be an individual, because otherwise, if it really is, we're all going to get sucked into it. It's like the Borg or the thing from A Wrinkle in Time. The villain in that. Like, there's a sense in which everybody all getting sucked into the same thing, and we all become one. That's actually like evil personified.
That's the pod people,
right? So you want to be in direct communion with God, but maintain your distinct ego, or I guess, or super ego, or whatever you want to call it. But and I think, again, the Christian story avoids the pitfalls that I see in other.
For sure it does. Yeah. But also thinking of God as the good, or this hierarchy of values that a guy like Peterson would talk about, that also accomplishes that job of preserving individual distinction while uniting us all in some common purpose, even if it's just, again, a hierarchy of values, trying to avoid misery and, embrace peace and thrive rather than perish and struggle, avoid pain.
Oh, sure. But I think just that, if that's all it were, it's lacking. Look, it's still, I guess it leads into existentialism or something. If it was just, the universe is just here, we don't know where it came from, but let's make the best of it. And can we all agree? And you know what I mean? Like, you're doing like a John Lennon worldview. And I think that lacks.
Well, that's interesting.
It really matters if there is a creator who isn't just like nature or the cosmos, but it's a person, or three persons in the Christianity, that thinks and is rational and has emotions and loves us, and you know what I mean.
This is an important distinction, because for the religious, you have to have something supernatural to have that, and for someone more in my intellectual tradition, quotes, heavy use of quotes, you can have that spirituality just in humans. In fact, from our perspective, we'd say that's what you're doing, Bob. You're taking a human idea and elevating it into something you're calling divine. And
right.
That's a noble purpose, I guess. But why do you need the parlor tricks and the fancy names? And why can't you just aim for the good in a more deliberate manner without the, I don't want to be pejorative, but, without the fairy tale superstructure.
Right. Well, let me just first, though, instead of trying to prove that or to argue for the existence or the higher probability of one versus the other, let me just explain, though, that the distinction really does matter. It's not simply like, oh, no, we have all the good stuff from your worldview, Bob. It's just we don't have, the unnecessary, we're doing Occam's razor. And you're just adding the cherry on the top that we don't need. I'm saying, no, it matters. And the way I'll motivate this is I'm a big fan of the Harry Potter series. And if people want to make fun of me or something, go right ahead. Your criticism bounces off of me.
I am too.
And the reason is because I read the first book. I thought it was okay. I actually thought she kind of ripped off from Star Wars. And then the second book I disliked so much I just stopped reading them. And my first son, though, he got into it. And so I was, so he was reading them. And so when he was with me, I would read to him at bedtime. And it was book 5. And I got so into it, I said, I have to go back and now reread to know what's going on and get caught up because this is amazing. So anyway, it occurred to me reading that, so like it's really awesome the way she did it among everything else going on in that series is, obviously that it's going to turn into a showdown between Harry and Voldemort. And Harry's going to, that's clearly what's going to happen.
Of course.
And the rest of it is just amazing details. But Harry doesn't know that.
Right.
And he's like worried he's going to flunk out of school and stuff. And he's, you know what I mean? And it's just,
right.
And so I want to grab him and say, don't you understand your whole world was designed by an author who loves you?
J.K. Rowling
everything.
Loves you. Relax.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying it's all going to be roses. Like tragedy and horrors are going to happen. You're going to lose friends and they're going to die horrible death. You know what I mean? Like bad stuff's going to happen. But don't lose hope because you have to realize this was all created, and the author really loves you and even loves the villains. Like, that's what I'm saying. It was just so amazing. Like, I just like J.K. Rowling so much more than Charles Dickens. Like Dickens, if he wants to make fun of someone, will just make the guy be a moron and say stupid stuff because he's, Charles Dickens is the dictator in that universe. Whereas
the way she treated like Snape, for example, I thought was
that was
quite
next level.
heartwarming.
But I'm saying even like the genuine, like even Voldemort, like in the sniveling, sick guy that's his servant, and then some of the other Death Eaters that like
Dolores
went along
Umbridge,
and then switched sides, and they were playing that. Like she really got into everyone's mind, like showed why they did what they did. And you can say, yeah, I know people like that. I could see why they did that, and they thought that was the right play. Anyway, just amazing. So, but my point was, then if it turned out though that no, Harry's going through and there was no author, it was just we got this magic and there's this characters and there's a story that's unfolding, but there's no author. Then Harry should be terrified. Right. And so anyway, I'm just saying, like, if you genuinely believe, not just saying, oh, it's as if, but no, there really is an objective right or wrong. There is an omniscient, benevolent creature, or not creature, being, because creature means it was created,
Right.
Observing everything and whatever. And this is all unfolding according to his plan. If you can accept that, it's actually comforting. A lot of people that they think that's awful. Like, oh, all right, so I can't control my destiny. No, he works that in somehow. Like, I think there is genuine free will and everything, unfolds according to his plan. But none of it, just like, I'll shut up now. I know I've been filibustering at him. Sorry. Does Harry freely choose to do what he did? Like the Death Eaters, did they freely choose to serve Voldemort? Yes. Well, no, but so the story isn't what J.K. Rowling wanted? No, it is. So however you want to deal with that, I'm saying by the same token, we have free will, and yet the history is going the way God knew it was going to happen from the outset.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, and I'm glad you made it. I'm not going to venture off into the free will determinist thing because I've written about it before, and I think we've talked about it a little bit before. But that distinction and
we had no choice but to.
I mean, I tried to fight against it, Bob, but but no, that distinction and that framework of thinking of God as an author and you as a beloved character, I don't agree with that, but I find it very compelling. I can see the distinction and the value for it. And just as a complete throwaway aside, since we're talking about great authors and books that shape people, it was a very narrow thing, I think, me not being a Christian, because I think C.S. Lewis tried real hard. I read the Chronicles of Narnia as a young kid, and I had no idea until book 6 or 7 that, you know, he was making me fall in love with this lion who was actually Jesus. That was dirty trick there, Mr. Lewis. But
How old were you?
grade school?
But can you be more specific?
Not really. It was either 5th or 6th.
Okay, that's what, because we were reading that. I want to say like 3rd grade or something, just the first one, and you know, like, you know, there would be a story time or something. The teacher would pull that again. When I was going to a Catholic school, and then at some point, the teacher said, "Now, you know, kids, you know, Aslan, you know, he's like Jesus," and I was blown away. And I thought my teacher was a genius.
Told you that after the first one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's way too early. There's 7 books, and you only kind of.
He was sacrificed. I mean, it was clearly. I'm saying now, as an adult reading, is like he so obviously was Jesus.
Yeah, but I didn't get it. I didn't get it. Till
Okay,
later.
all right. But anyway, I'm just saying it was funny because I thought my teacher was a genius, as opposed to, well, no, it was, if you're older, if you're a Christian and you're reading it as an adult,
course. Yeah,
it jumps out at you, you know, crystal clear what it is, what's going on.
All very, very good stuff. I mean, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say we fulfilled the advertisement. We solved all the questions and answered all the. If you don't understand everything about religion and God and the universe and human nature after this hour and 13 minutes, folks, you just weren't paying attention. Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for either having just watched Human Nature or the Bob Murphy Show. We'll catch you later.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Adam.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.